Let's break down the stats of the newest assault rifle, the EM2. The EM2 is a high damage, slow fire rate assault rifle with an integrated scope. Sounds a lot like the C58, so it's going to be interesting to see how they compare to each other. And in case you're wondering, the integrated scope is 1.30 times zoom, as much as a Silix Holo Scout or a Cobra Red Dot. So before we get into the stats, let's break down the recommended build. In this build, we'll be using the suppressor, the 25.8 inch task force barrel, the axial arms 3x scope, the field agent grip, and the 40 round mags. So let's get into the stats, starting with mobility. Its ADS speed is pretty decent at 300 milliseconds, which is a little bit fast for a Cold War weapon. Its reload and reload add times are 2.93 and 2.03 seconds, which is also reasonably fast. Its mag cap is 40, which isn't the highest, but because of its extreme low rate of fire, you won't be going through this as fast. And its movement and sprint speeds are pretty good because it's a Cold War weapon, and it's actually in line with the C58, but it's slightly lower than the FARA and the Krig. Its ADS strafe speed is also in line for a long-range weapon, and its sprint out and tac sprint out times are pretty average. Its aiming stability is 1.7T, which isn't the best for a long-range weapon, but it is still slightly better than the C58's. And its bullet velocity is 1,111.1 meters per second, which is identical to the C58. Lastly, its rate of fire is 8.94 rounds per second, or 536.5 rounds per minute. So it gets a mobility score of 34. Its recoil is pretty much straight up. It's very slow, so it's easy to control, and because of its aiming stability, it sometimes moves a bit to the right and a bit to the left. But if you're lucky, it can be pretty much literally just vertical. Because of this, in full auto, it is extremely accurate up to 135 meters, which is 5 less than the C58 and 15 less than the FARA. So it gets a recoil score of 45. In the damage category, it has one drop off at 30 meters. Under 30 meters, its headshot damage and TTKs aren't really that great. Its upper torso is pretty competitive, and its lower torso and limb TTKs are not the greatest. So while you could technically use this up close if you're only hitting upper torso and headshots, you're probably going to be hitting lower torso and limb shots in, and it's not going to work out that great. After 30 meters though, it is competitive everywhere. No matter where you hit, you will be beating most other weapons. The EM2 will beat basically the C58 and FARA in every single category, except for the C58 has a slight advantage in the headshot department. Although the difference between the EM2 and the FARA in upper torso, lower, and limb are only about 7 milliseconds, so if you miss with the EM2, you will get beaten. So it gets a damage score of 62.5. And when we add up all the categories, we get a final score of 141.5. This is a pretty great score for a long-range weapon. It's not directly overpowered in any sense, but it does start to match the power of the FARA. To get out of the way, the best way to use the EM2 is in a long-range form. You can pair it with a high-mobility SMG, or even try the new Combat Scout perk with it, along with a Psychov or an M63. So let's compare the EM2, C58, and the FARA a little bit more. And we'll only be comparing the long-range versions, because of course you can build a faster weapon, but it won't have the same role in the end. When comparing mobility, the C58 and the M2 are extremely similar. Their ADS times are very close, as well as their reload times, and their movement and sprint speeds are pretty much identical. Their bullet velocity is also identical, and their rate of fire are close enough. In my mobility category, the only thing that the FARA really wins is movement and sprint speed and its rate of fire, where it has 13.3 rounds per second, which is a lot more than the 9.25 of the C58 and 8.94 of the EM2. And its ADS time is pretty bad, 360 milliseconds compared to 280 of the C58 and 300 of the EM2. When comparing recoil, the FARA has the least amount, followed by the C58, and at the end we have the EM2. However, I should note that the EM2 has slightly less apparent side-to-side bounce than the C58, but it is only apparent because of its slightly higher vertical recoil magnitude and its slower rate of fire. For damage, if we go off of average TTK values and not just in one category, at the bottom we would have the EM2, next the C58, and at the top the FARA. The FARA has a 70 millisecond advantage to the EM2 and a 50 millisecond advantage to the C58. However, they will all lose in one category to each other. Like the C58 has the best headshot damage, the EM2 has the best upper torso damage, and the FARA has the best lower torso and limb damage. But when we compare the second damage range average TTK, the EM2 wins. It is followed by the FARA and then the C58. The difference between the FARA and the EM2 is about 7 milliseconds, but compared to the C58, that's about 85. I said it before in the mid-season patch video, but the C58 after its nerf, it does deal great damage and it's less shots to kill than the FARA, but it just can't compete that well at longer ranges in terms of TTK potential. And now that we have the EM2, there's pretty much no reason to ever pick the C58, unless you want slightly better performance in the first damage range or you can't handle the recoil of the new weapon. So the real battle is between the FARA and the EM2. The FARA has a much worse ADS time, so if you're being more aggressive, you're definitely not going to want to pick the FARA. It does, however, have a much faster rate of fire. If you both start missing equal amounts of shots, then the FARA will be coming out on top. And once we get to 3 shots missed with the EM2, the FARA can now miss 4 and still win. And because the EM2 has a much better ADS time, if you both see each other at the same time, the FARA will be losing. But the trade-off for its terrible ADS seems to be its extremely easy to control recoil. So if you do feel like the EM2's recoil is too much, but you'd still want that great TTK potential, then you may want to use the FARA. But if you can master the recoil of the EM2, then there's no real reason to choose the FARA for longer ranges, unless you want its flinch potential because of its faster rate of fire. Another thing about these guns is that at extremely long ranges, you aren't going to be able to be accurately full autoing, so you will have to start tap firing or burst firing. And in this area, the EM2 wins because it deals much more damage in single shots. Under 30 meters, if a FARA and an EM2 both see each other at the same time, after they both ADS and fire their first shot, the FARA will only have an 11 millisecond advantage, and the EM2 will be firing its shot first, meaning the FARA may flinch and miss. But the same goes for the EM2. Because of its slower rate of fire, you may be missing a lot more. Even though the FARA does have better performance up close, I would still choose the EM2. You're not going to be using either of these weapons for up close because you'll have a better secondary. So in the end, pick the EM2 if you can handle its recoil, and you are staying on target. Or pick the FARA if you are needing a bit of help with the recoil, but also understand that you may be losing fights due to that ADS time. But that's the EM2. Have you unlocked it yet and used it yet? What'd you think about it? And if there's any weapon, idea, or topic you want me to cover, let me know and you may see it on the next Community Wednesday. So that's the video. If you enjoyed it or it's helped you in any way, let me know by leaving a like. If you got any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section down below. And if you want to make sure that you never miss another video, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.